This is our agenda tonight for our session on using Votebuilder to manage volunteer teams. I'm going to do a quick overview of the My Campaigns section in Votebuilder, and then I will talk about different tools and different processes in Votebuilder that you can use to recruit volunteers, manage the volunteers you have, use Votebuilder as it relates to events you might hold, and then at the end, I will share some additional resources. Brian, if you wouldn't mind dropping these 3 links in the chat again. If you are here and Votebuilder is not something you are at all familiar with, if you are not a Votebuilder administrator, I want to share these other links that might be more appropriate for you, whether you are here in North Carolina and you're available to knock on doors and talk to voters with us. If you aren't able to knock on doors, or if you're out of state and you want to make phone calls. And then the third link includes all of the training sessions that I have scheduled. Thank you, Brian. So as we jump into Votebuilder here, a couple of general tips, and I share these in all of the Votebuilder trainings. Votebuilder is an incredibly powerful tool. It requires patience, practice, and experimentation. So it does take more than an hour to learn. Brian and I, between the two of us, I can't keep track. I don't know. We got 15 years of experience or something like that with Votebuilder. Brian has way more than me, and I still learn new things all the time. I will say that the more you use it, the easier and faster it gets. There are certain tasks that I do every single week, and I can really do those very quickly now, even though the first 1, 2, 3 times I did them, it took me a while to figure out what I needed to do. So it does get easier and faster with practice. There's also more than one way to do things. I'm going to walk through some processes and show you how I do them. If you already know how to do them and you do them slightly differently, have at it. There is more than one way to do a lot of these functions, which is why experimentation is important. And also, you pretty much can't break Votebuilder. So don't be afraid to try a couple of different types of searches and click on things and see what happens. It's honestly how I've learned quite a bit of Votebuilder. So I have done quite a few trainings on Votebuilder in general, and I always talk about my voters and my campaigns, which are the 2 main sections within Votebuilder. My voters is where we have the voter role. If you are doing direct voter contact, which we call DVC, if you're trying to talk to voters, you will be in the My Voters tab. The My Campaigns tab is really where you will find and manage information about volunteers. So our focus tonight will be largely in My Campaigns. I do want to call out this slide about who can be a volunteer because it's different than how we're used to thinking about voters. Of course, voters have to be citizens. They have to be 18 years of age or older on election day. There's some limitations here. And also for donors. Donors have some limitations as well, depending on the type of race. But for volunteers, non-voters can volunteer. People who are out of state can volunteer here in North Carolina. People under 18, non-US citizens. So we can really cast a wider net when we think about who might be available to volunteer. This is the slide so that if you look at these training materials later, or if you are watching this as a video, this might be a good place where you want to start trying to follow along and practice some of these skills yourself. For people who are watching this video later, maybe watch a skill, hit pause, practice it yourself. Or if you get these slides later, I encourage you to log in and try out some of the skills that I'm going to demonstrate. A lot of what I'm going to focus on today within the campaign section, I'm going to talk a good bit about the volunteer management section that I have drawn a box around there in the left-hand column. So just wanted to call that out. It's not a section that I normally talk about a lot, but for this on managing your volunteer teams, it will come in handy. I'm going to start demonstrating some skills. Particularly, I'm going to start with recruiting volunteers. But before I move on, I wanted to pause and see what questions you have. Our lists that we create and save in My Voters, do they show up in My Campaigns? No, they are distinct lists. How do we register for Votebuilder? So Mary, Brian can drop the link in the chat. I would say that for the state party, we make Votebuilder available to our county party chairs. We are also offering it to judicial candidates in this election cycle. If you are maybe a precinct leader, you would get that access from your county party chairs. We have a couple of candidates here. Tim, you probably have your own version of Votebuilder. I see you nodding. Yeah. Claire, we might have provided it for the state ledge race. And I see that Brian dropped an answer in the chat as well. That was much more succinct than mine. Yeah, Claire has her own committee. Audrey, put a pin in that question, please. Let's go through some more of this demo. And when we get to the end, if you're still not seeing the tools that you need, flag it for us. So let's come back to that. And Mary, Votebuilder is used across the country. A couple nuances here. One is that California political campaigns usually run on a competitor tool, which is called PDI. So if you're in California, you might be looking for PDI access, which I do know that the California Democratic Party has. Let's see here. We touch upon best practice in terms of unaffiliated voters having access to PII. So for Votebuilder, we do not give access to anyone who is not registered as a Democrat. You might be talking about volunteers in general who are knocking doors using minivan. In that case, I mean, I'll see what Brian says, but the amount of data that a volunteer knocking doors would have access to is pretty small. So I think that's a very small risk. Brian, did you catch that question?
I did, yeah. So for door knocking, everything that you said is totally correct. They no longer have access to the data once the packet is synced. So it would need to be a pretty determined bad actor to really do anything terrible with it. Obviously, gut checks and vibe checks with your volunteers are critical when you're determining who's going to get access to what. I will note that one of the reasons why we really like OpenVPB for volunteers for phone banking is that it does limit the amount of data that is visible in a way that is not the case if they're accessing a virtual phone bank directly through Votebuilder. So we keep more of the data in that case accessible for folks who are registered Democrats and are trusted with a full login account.
Yeah, if we don't, and you should not give access to Votebuilder. It's not allowed by the license for anyone who's not a registered Democrat. And also one of the benefits of using OpenVPB for phone banks or minivan versus the previous, I don't know, 10 years ago when everything was printed, is that everybody's information was more easily floating in the ether. So big fan of minivan and open virtual phone banks. Okay, let me move on here and start talking about recruiting volunteers. I know I did ask somebody to put a pin in a question if it comes up later. I think I'll get through the content in time that I can perhaps live demonstrate a couple of skills. So if there's something in particular that comes up that you might want to see, keep a note of that. My first message here on recruiting volunteers is to start where you are. We all, depending on whether you're a candidate, whether you are a county party, a precinct leader, we're all starting from slightly different places. Some county parties have had consistently robust volunteer management programs in their counties, and others are maybe just starting up those types of programs. So I might share some stuff that you won't have a chance to tackle in 2024, and that's okay. We're going to start where we are. I'm always thinking about the long term. I'm thinking about what can I accomplish this cycle and what am I going to do in 2025 so that I am very well prepared in 2026. So we will start where we are. My first piece of advice, if you're starting from scratch, and candidates do in fact start with an empty version of MyCampaigns, county parties, precincts might have information in there from previous years. But you probably, even if MyCampaign is blank, you probably have lists of volunteers, whether you have spreadsheets, whether maybe you have an email newsletter that goes out regularly. You have people who have attended your events like precinct meetings or county party meetings. Your website might have a general interest form, like a Google Sheet people fill out. You have contacts in your phone. Those are all places to mine to get your volunteer program up and running if you are starting from, a blank slate, or maybe you picked up this work from someone who used to do it for your county and it's been maybe not nurtured for the past couple of years. If you need to beef up that volunteer base, those are a couple of things, a couple of resources for you to think about. What do you always have that you can get into Votebuilder so you can more effectively manage it? Now, if you go through those lists and you've got your Facebook followers and you have people who have filled out a general interest form and maybe you have an email newsletter, I'm going to show you how to get those names into Votebuilder so you can more efficiently manage them. Now, if you have like under 100 people that you're identifying that you want to get into Votebuilder, you will follow this manual process that I'm about to show you. If you have a big group of people that is worth adding to Votebuilder, Brian has super magic data man skills, and he can help with that. I will say we've got 106 days to go, and it's gotten pretty busy. So there's a limited runway for Brian to be able to help with some of those things. You come back in 2025 and we will absolutely be happy to help you. Right now, we're kind of on the clock. So if you need help with this, holler quickly. Okay. So this is the process for adding an individual to MyCampaigns. The first step, you can see that I am in MyCampaigns within Votebuilder, and I'm at the quick lookup page. So I'm going to enter the person I'm looking for. I'm going to enter their first name, last name, enter what I know about them, and hit search, which is in the bottom right-hand corner. I got the red box around it. If they show up and they're already in MyCampaigns, fantastic. If they don't show up, you will see what I have here by this number 1, where it says no results found. I would encourage you to, maybe if you need to try couple different permutations of how somebody spells their name. I always say, like, my legal name is Christina. I go by Christy. So, you might have to try a couple different names. But if you don't find them in MyCampaigns, step number 2 here is to search the voter file. And that will search my voters. So if they're in North Carolina, if they're registered voter, should be able to find them that way. In this example here, and I've kind of blurred out some of the personal information, I looked up my husband's name. It's there by it's blurred out a little, but by number 3. So we can see Matthew Heckert. There's a little circle. I clicked to indicate next to his name. And then number 4 is I'm going to copy person, and that will move him and all his information, all his contact information from my voters to my campaigns. And now he's in my campaigns. So if you, this is a task, especially if you are a county party chair or a precinct leader, maybe you lead one of our auxiliary organizations. This is probably a task that someone should be doing on an ongoing basis. Once a week, like what were the new volunteer leads that I manually need to enter this week? So that you are keeping up with it. I really love, who did I engage with on social media? Who liked my post? You really want to mine for some volunteer leads. Who engaged with me on social media? And again, if you have a big list, if you're a candidate, you're just starting out and you need to import your entire um, iPhone phone book or whatever, reach out to us. And if Brian has capacity, we will try to help. Tim, so I would think of it in a couple different ways, and I'm going to show a couple of options. Hold that thought, please. I think I have slides that will address it. But if I don't, come back at the end. Thank you. Okay, back to this My Campaigns page in Votebuilder and the volunteer management section. So I've drawn a red arrow to the volunteer management section, and then I have a red box around, I think, an underutilized feature within Votebuilder. These are 3 kind of pre-built searches within your volunteer database that you can recruit from. So these 3 pre-built searches, first we have active volunteers. This is anybody who has completed 1 shift in the last 30 days. So think about this strategically. I might call those people, those are my active volunteers. I'm going to call them and invite them to the next event as well. This is probably, you know, a group that I'm going to have a weekly phone bank to and make sure I have an event for them to come to. The next list is lapsed volunteers. So they have done a volunteer shift at some point, but not in the last 30 days. I will tell you that right now, I would be focused on this list. Given the changes to the political landscape, to the top of the ticket, the mood shift, I would be reaching out to lapsed volunteers this week, tapping into that new enthusiasm, and I would be shifting them into something. I'm going to schedule those people into events this week. The third list here are hot leads. So these are people who were added to my campaigns in the past 7 days, but have not yet been scheduled for a shift. So people can get into my campaigns in a few ways. And this a little bit gets to your question, Tim, but if you have Mobilize for your event management, which is the tool you use to sign up for tonight's class, if your Mobilize is integrated with your Votebuilder, as soon as people sign up on Mobilize, they're added to Votebuilder My Campaigns. That's one way people get in there. I see your face, Tim. I saw that was a eureka, yeah? That's one way people get in here. I showed you the manual way. If you are phone banking in My Voters and people indicate in your script that they're interested in volunteering, they stay in My Voters, and I will tell you how we get those people in a minute. So these 3 pre-built lists, active, lapsed, and hot leads. Hot leads is the other one that, like, I'm calling through that list. I might call through it every day. Maybe there are only 2 people every day. But those are people who just indicated that they're interested, and I want to jump on that right away. The other thing to consider when you're working with these 2 pre-built groups is your message might be a little different to each group. Like, I'm not going to say, hey, our records show you're a lapsed volunteer. Like, I'm not going to do that. But I might say, like, hey, we've missed you lately. summer's heating up and so is our campaign. I don't know. I might say something like that. Whereas if there's somebody active, maybe the message is like, we've been able to count on you throughout this election, and now we're heading into the last 100 days and it's time to ramp up. So depending on this audience, you might adjust your messaging, and you will probably come up with much better phrasing than I just did on the fly. I see your question in the chat, Tricia, and I think Brian might be able to help with that. But give us a moment. Okay, when you're at those three pre-built groups, active, lapsed, or hot leads, when you click on that, you can see there's a little arrow there. It will pop up. So right there, you can create a virtual phone bank. It's just super quick. You don't need to build a list. You don't need to like just go to active volunteers, create a virtual phone bank, call through that list. In my voters. So I mentioned that when you are canvassing, when you're talking to voters in general, that direct voter contact happens in my voters. And I always encourage, and our scripts always include a question that says, like, if we identify someone who's a strong supporter, do you want to volunteer? If they say yes, and they're marked as yes when you're phone banking or canvassing, it will be recorded in my voter. They do not move over to my campaign. So it creates an activist code. This is a screenshot. I don't know, I took this a couple months ago, but this is a list of some of the activist codes related to volunteering. So you probably do want to pull a phone bank in my voters where you look for people who have a volunteer related activist code. And again, this is a week for volunteer recruitment. The mood is great. People are excited. I would be making some heavy vol recruitment calls this week. So you can see here we've got, like people who in 2022 said they would be willing to canvas. I don't know if they ever did or not, but I'm going to consider adding those people to my recruitment call list. Another option, this is again in my voters. We looked at activist codes. What I'm showing on the screen now is targets. So in other classes, I talk about the targeted universes because when you're building a phone bank or if you're building a canvas, we recommend using the persuasion and turnout targets. We also have this target group that is 2024 volunteer recruitment. We're on version 3 because we know we're always cleaning our data. We're always getting stronger and better at our targeting. This volunteer recruitment list is people on the voter roll in North Carolina who have very high Democratic support scores and very high voter turnout scores. So I would probably make a phone bank to this group and start off by saying, hi, I'm Tim Merrick and I'm running for school board and I was calling to talk to you about, what you would like to see from our local school board, whatever your pitch is. And I would expect that as long as your opponent's a Republican, I'm going to expect that you're going to get good responses from this phone bank. And you are going to know these are such strong Dem supporters. I'm absolutely going to make a volunteer recruitment pitch on these calls for every supporter identify. They may have never volunteered before. They may not volunteer, but it is a really good universe to have some of those conversations. Yeah, yeah. Can't knock on a door. Can you give me $5? How about 500? Yes. If you need a volunteer recruitment script, you can reach out. Our standard scripts do include a volunteer recruitment ask. I will say if I'm making volunteer recruitment calls from my campaigns, my script will be different because those are people who have already engaged with the campaign, with the party, with the county party. Those people, what I like to do for those conversations is say, hey, I'm Christy with the North Carolina Democratic Party, and I was reaching out because I heard that you have volunteered in the past or you might be interested in volunteering. Before I talk about that, I'd love to ask what motivated you to get involved. It brings me joy and it's effective. So I really encourage you to work that language in when it's targeted volunteer recruitment efforts. Okay, I mentioned integration. So, and Brian, I think, is looking to get an answer for that question. But if you particularly, my candidates here, our candidates, our county party chairs, um, for the county parties, we offer you Votebuilder and we offer you Mobilize for free. Please, we would love to help you integrate those two tools to increase your effectiveness. This way, everybody who signs up and Mobilize does get on that list. So you all are here because you signed up to attend this class. Your names go into call lists, and the organizers call everyone who attends a training. They call them to invite them to events in their area. So that's a good way to think about a holistic program and to have them integrated. I've also mentioned that I always have a volunteer ask in my scripts. I'm not asking everybody to volunteer. If I talk to somebody and they're undecided, they're a swing voter, like, I'm going to have my typical persuasion conversation. But when I bump into someone who's a strong D or, heavily leaning Democratic, I'm going to ask them to join us. We can't do this by ourselves. We always need to be getting more people in the mix to help us talk to all the voters we need to. Okay. I see a question in the chat. Give me a moment to read it. I'm going to talk next about some tools for managing the volunteers you already have, but questions on recruiting volunteers. And let me read this question in the chat. John, Well, it sounds like John's in the chat saying he would love to help people who need some help with Votebuilder. Also, Brian, if you want to drop that phone bank link, if you can find it quickly in the chat, I believe that the phone banks that we are doing right now, and we do, I think the schedule is Tuesday, Thursday, 1 p.m. Eastern and 3 p.m. on both days. Oh, awesome. You're signed up. Those are heavy volunteer recruitment phone banks, I believe. And also our friend Tim here would love some help. Is that a New York area code, Tim? Yeah, I lived in Queens for a while, right when Manhattan was split from 212 to 646. And boy,
Yes,
unnecessary.
I'm dirtying North Carolina with this damn Yankee blood. Sorry.
We're all Democrats here. We'll let it slide. Okay, let's talk about managing volunteers. One thing that I do, so I mentioned way up front that I will send an email in like 24 hours with the slides from tonight's training. This is the technique that I use, the tool that I use within Votebuilder to do that. It is called an email blob. So what I do is first I load a list into Votebuilder. And I think in a few slides, I will specifically show you how to load a list of people who have attended an event. So I'm going to load the list. There is an export button. In general, your export capabilities in Votebuilder are very limited. But we can send an email blob. So we're in MyCampaigns. You can see the export format that I have selected is email blob. Please click on Customize Export so that you can narrow it to preferred email address. This is one thing that I learned too late. If you don't do this, every single email we have associated with you will get the same email. So I definitely sent post training emails like, 4 times to the same person. If I did that to you, I'm sorry. I'm now smarter. So we're going to select preferred email addresses. Step 5 is to export. I've got a screen here so that people's personal information is not on the screen, but it brings up this list of everybody's email. I think this is comma separated. Click on select all email addresses. And then I'm going to go to my Gmail and paste all of these email addresses into the BCC field. Really encourage you to use BCC so that you're not sharing everybody's information. And if somebody replies and says something, it doesn't go to everyone on the list, all that. But that is the process for creating an email blob. I will walk through a couple of ways that I use that here in a couple of slides. Are the scripts loaded into the platforms? So we do make scripts available for county parties who have Votebuilder through the North Carolina Democratic Party. If you are a candidate or for some reason you have your own version of Votebuilder, you would need to create a script, and the class on how to create scripts is coming up next week. I'm going to talk next about event management tools in Votebuilder. Any other questions before I move on? All right, here we go. Events. One thing I do before events is make confirmation calls to everyone who's scheduled. You probably all got a confirmation call today from Lori, who is my fantastic volunteer who makes confirmation calls for all the training events. So because my event is on Mobilize and my Mobilize is integrated with Votebuilder, I can pull a list of the expected attendees pretty easily to make a confirmation phone bank. There are a couple of goals for these confirmation calls. In general, for planning purposes, I normally say expect to have a 50% no-show rate for any event. When you have Mobilize, which sends automatic confirmations, and if you have an actual human, like I have Lori, make confirmation calls, you will have fewer people who don't show up. So our goals are to remind people about the event. I've had this event posted for a month or so. There were definitely people who signed up 3 weeks ago. So I want to make sure they remember it's coming up. It's always an opportunity for us to be improving our data. So if you told Lori like, oh, hey, this is my home number, it's probably better if you call me on my cell phone. That's probably been updated in our system. So we're always improving the quality of our data. If you have an event, especially if it's in person, having an accurate sense of how many people are going to show up is really important. It's less critical on Zoom, unless you're reaching, 100 people, 500 people, 1,000. But in person, if you were bringing literature, if you're bringing donuts, whatever, it helps to know how many people to expect. And then also, I'm always trying to reshift people. So if Lori calls someone and they say, hey, I can't make this session, I'm so disappointed. She probably said to them, well, we have another Votebuilder training next week. Do you want to join us for that? Or if I'm making confirmation calls for a weekend canvas, I'm going to say, oh, I'm sorry you can't make it this weekend. We're doing another canvas in 2 weekends. Can we see you at that one? So you want to have a basic confirmation call script. I have one, and again, we do have script training coming up here in 1 week. This is how I set up my confirmation call phone bank. So in MyCampaigns, when I've created a new search, the main search criteria box that I'm using here is events. So I click on events, and I'm going to step number 2. Thank you, Brian. Step number 2, I'm going to include people who are scheduled for events. You can narrow by the type of event. All of my events are training, so I put training here. You might have canvases or phone banks. This field is optional. Then step number 4, when I click on the word events, I can actually then type in the name of my event to narrow it down to tonight's training. What I usually do when I pull this search is that I'm going to, as my step 5, preview my results. I am an overly thorough person. I look at how many people show up there and I see how many people are signed up on Mobilize, and I kind of make sure I've got, basically the same number of people. So when I've gotten to a place where I feel like I've got a good number here, so you can see I included people who were 2024 NCDP training on Van or Votebuilder. I can't tell what particular date this was, but I can see there were 22 people. I feel good about this search. I'm going to step 6 here, click on the run search button. When it loads my list, then I will click on the call icon and build my phone bank. So this is my confirmation call script. One thing I do here that Brian taught me recently is step number 8 here, event. You can add event shift to your script so that when Lori calls, if you say, no, I can't make it, she can mark you as canceled. Or if you say, yes, I'll be there, she will mark you as confirmed. So on the right-hand side of the screen is the process for picking the specific event you are calling people about. I'm not sure, Tim, quite what you're asking. So this is because we have the Mobilize integration. So when I search for an event that is posted on Mobilize, I'm able to find it in Votebuilder. You can, I think, do events in Votebuilder, create them, and honestly, I've never done it. I know you can also do it in PDI for my California friend. If that wasn't quite what you're asking, then type in the chat and we'll try to answer that. Okay, so before an event, I walked through the process to make confirmation calls. After the event, I do 2 things. I close my shifts. The jargon we use, we're closing out our shifts. And what this means is that everyone who has signed up for an event, after it has concluded, usually the next day or so, I will go through and mark who was there, so that I'll mark them as completed, or I will mark them as a no-show. I got a typo on my slide there. Sorry about that. And I'll show you a little bit of what that looks like. The other thing I do after events, I do my post-event email blob. So I'm going to send an email tomorrow that says, thank you for coming. Here are the slide materials. Here's how to reach me if you need anything. I'm going to close shifts here. And I want to mention how important it is to close your shifts. So earlier I was showing the lists for volunteer recruitment, and it was like, these are people who are lapsed volunteers, or these are active volunteers. Those searches depend on having accurate information about who has in fact attended events in the past. So it's kind of a garbage in, garbage out. If you do a good job of keeping track of who shows up, you'll be able to do a better job of recruiting people. So to close shifts, on the left-hand side, I click on the event list. I got a red arrow there. Brings up this screen with the different filter options. Personally, I immediately narrow by date. For me, if I narrow by date and then I narrow it to training, it usually pulls up just a couple of things. In this screenshot, I actually have a 4-day date range. And so when I search, you can see the events that it listed within that date range that were trainings. And I'm looking in particular for managing your volunteer program, Votebuilder training, which I have a red arrow at. So there is a little Oh, so in this case, I think I click on that one and it will take me to the event. Within the event, I'm looking for the participants summary section. When I click on the little caret, the side arrow, the menu will drop down. And now I can see attendee, invited, left message, scheduled, confirmed. There are a bunch of categories here. I do not use all of them. But in this case, like everybody who was scheduled but didn't attend this April event, I'm going to go in and mark them as a no-show. So I know that they weren't there. So when I click on view all participants, it will bring up everybody's name and their personal information. The standard I hold myself to and that we hold our staff organizers to is that within 24 hours, anyone who is scheduled to attend your event should be marked as completed, no-show, or canceled. And then as you update people's status, save that information. It's one of the things that is often an afterthought, but it really will help you with your volunteer recruitment program if you keep track of who has actually showed up to events.